So every time I post a video about my music collection, I get a couple comments asking if I could just show off the whole thing. So today, we're going to go over the entire vinyl collection. It might be kind of a long video, I'm not really sure, but hopefully I'll try to make it shorter than it should be. I kind of figured that now would be a great time to show off the music collection just because at some point in time, I want to start selling what I have. I've grown past the accumulation phase and I kind of want to start selling different things just so I can fund, different gear and stuff for my channel and just kind of develop my channel more. Yeah, I just thought this would be a great moment in time to just go over everything while I still have everything. Not trying to get rid of like the whole thing, but there are choice picks that I would like to maybe sell at some point. I'll definitely go over the CDs in a different video, but today I just want to go over the vinyl. To start with, the vinyl is alphabetized A through Z and all in English. The CDs are actually organized by Japanese CDs and English CDs and alphabetized according to their respective language. But for the vinyl, I just got kind of lazy and decided to just mash them all together. So we're just going to go through every single one and then just talk about it a little bit. Starting off at the very beginning, this is the Black Keys, the Big Come Up. This is their very first release that they ever put out. And honestly, I really love it. I think for me, I'm a really big fan of the Black Keys' earlier work. To me, their earlier work is really the band that I really got to know and love. And yeah, this is just no exception. This is just a very raw, very bluesy rock and roll album. I just like the rawness of it. I think that's what makes it really pure, in my opinion. Next up, we have a couple Black Sabbath albums. I'll start off here with the first one. This is basically the album that got me into Black Sabbath personally, and I really love this one, and this pressing in particular is great. I think this one's from like 2016 or something. There are really no misses on this album, in my opinion. I think this is a really great album. Moving on to their second album, this is Paranoid. This is obviously one of the greatest metal albums of all time. I really love this album as well. I think in particular, this pressing is really good. Warner Records pressing. This is one you could just buy on Amazon. Despite this like ugly looking new logo that they have for this record, this album really just kicks ass. I think this is a really great pressing. It just sounds so dynamic and full. And yeah, I mean, like I said, if you just want a copy of this one, just get the one on Amazon because this one's solid. Last but certainly not least in my Black Sabbath collection, this is Master of Reality. Now this is different. This is a Sanctuary pressing. As you can see, this is a Sanctuary or the old Vertigo logo. This is from Europe, and I will say that I personally don't like it as much as the other two Warner pressings in my collection. I think that this one is okay, but you really kind of have to turn it up, and I think it sounds a bit muddy. I think I really want to get a Warner pressing at some point of this album, but I'm not really in any rush to do it because I know this is going to be repressed until the end of time. So what else is left to say about this album as far as music goes? I mean, this is one of the greatest, like, sort of entering into doom, sludge territory as far as metal goes. So yeah, this is a great one as well. Next up, we got a couple Boris albums, starting with 1998's Amplifier Warship. This is a third man reissue, but I mean, honestly, this album is just phenomenal, and I had to have it. I was going to get the CD, but when they announced this, I was just like, bought it immediately, basically. I think the sound quality is alright, but I think as far as the album goes, this is just one of the heaviest albums of all time, one of the heaviest albums I've ever heard, and certainly worth listening to if you're into that sort of music. Next up, we have one of my personal favorite Boris albums, as well as just one of my personal favorite albums in general, and that's Boris's Floyd. This is also a third man reissue. It's also a trifold, which is kind of neat. It's very thick. As far as this album goes, I love it, but I do think the vinyl version suffers a bit because obviously you have to flip the discs over, whereas on the CD, every track flows seamlessly together. But yeah, that being said, I just kind of had to own it on vinyl, And this is another album that I don't really know what's left to say about it. It's very ambient, it's very atmospheric, and it's very heavy, especially towards the end. And yeah, I couldn't recommend this album enough. Moving on to the last Boris album in my vinyl collection, this is Heavy Rocks 2002. Yeah, this is just a phenomenal album in general. I think this is one of my all-time favorite metal albums, if not my favorite metal album ever. I think it's highly worth a listen if you get the chance. The only issue I have with this vinyl version is that it's a different track list than the original CD version, which I also do have. But other than that, yeah, this one's great. This is also a special orange vinyl album. Let's see if I can get it out here. There you go. It's very orange and it's very nice. I don't remember where I got this. Maybe like Turntable Lab or something. Next up, we got two albums by Casiopea, which of course is the jazz fusion giant of Japan. First up, we have the famous Car album, the self-titled Casiopea album. This one's really good. It's not an original press, but it came around, maybe 1980, 1981. I can't remember exactly the year on this. It says 80 on the back, but anyways. The thing about this album, I will say, is that I know a lot of people discovered the album through YouTube, and there's a video on YouTube that has a full album, but the whole track list is like wrong. But honestly, Personally, I kind of prefer that YouTube track list over the track list on the actual album, just because I feel like there are certain choices made that kind of don't really flow as well on this album as they do and whoever made that playlist on YouTube, or the the track list. The guitar work on this is really great. I aspire to play guitar like this at some point in my life. And then next we have Superflight, which is the album that came after the self-titled, and this one's good. I just kind of got this one because I wanted an album of that sort of era of Casiopea, and I really liked the self-titled, so I figured that why not just get the next one, see what it's like. Next up, we got a great one if you're a guitar fan. This one's Chuck Berry, Berry is on Top. And I believe my brother bought me this one for my birthday. But yeah, this one's really good. I just like it a lot. I never really listened to a lot of Chuck Berry. I think he set the stage for a lot of guitar work that came after him, and you really can't go wrong with this compilation. Okay, moving on, we got 3 albums by Daft Punk. They're one of my favorite artists ever since I got into them like a couple years back. Starting off with 1997's Homework. Can't go wrong with this one. This is such a vibe. It's very sort of primitive almost in a way as far as dance music goes. But I think it's really great. Just the sounds on this thing, the sonics, what they were trying to go for, the beats on this. I mean, it's so like, it's almost like a punk album in the way that the instruments were arranged on this record. I think it's really great, and it's just like, you just got to give it a chance, like, and check it out, because I really love this album. I think it's a really great testament as far as the simplicity of music that you can create. Next up, of course, we got Discovery. Discovery is just one of my all-time favorite albums now, and this is another one of those albums that, like, what's there left to say about this album, because it's just so good, and I highly recommend you just check it out. I mean, this whole album's full of bangers. Last but not least, we have Random Access Memories. It's probably like my least favorite of the 3 that I have. But that being said, I mean, it's just so good sonically and musically. It's really kind of an album that you recognize as this is what Daft Punk was trying to achieve at the end of everything. And it really delivers, in my opinion. Next up, we have an album that I'm not sure a lot of people are going to know. This one's called For the Whole World to See by Death. The story of this album is that there are 3 brothers back in Detroit, I believe. And they were getting an album together in the mid-70s that was very proto-punk, punk sounding. Their funding was cut because whoever was funding them didn't like that they had the band name Death. They wanted them to change it, but they did not want to change it, and who could blame them, really, because what a great name, am I right? Anyways, the album was shelved for a long time. They did release a single, and basically their single gained a lot of notoriety, and eventually people found who they were, and they released the songs that they had recorded for the album, the 7 songs that they had. And honestly, this album is just so freaking cool. Like, it's such a great punk album. It's such a great rock album. Like, I just highly recommend this album if you're really into both of those genres. I just think that the whole album delivers, and it makes me kind of sad that we'll never get to hear, like, the whole thing, you know? But at least we got these 7, and quite a good 7 tracks they are. Next up, we got the Dire Straits self-titled album. This is actually a mobile fidelity pressing, as you can see by this banner here. As far as the album goes, it's a great album, a great guitar album. Highly recommend it. You know, it's kind of mid-70s, and just the guitar work that Mark Knopfler delivers on this is phenomenal. As far as the pressing quality goes, I think it's probably one of the best vinyl records that I have in my collection as far as quality. Mobile Fidelity is known for literally their fidelity. I mean, they always put out really good releases, audiophile pressings and things like that. There has been a scandal like a couple of years ago, I think. They've always claimed to have analog, source their music from analog sources, but it came out that it was actually digital for some of them. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to Mobile Fidelity, although I don't really condone what they did and how they advertised that, you're really just paying for a good sonic quality pressing when it comes to their product. And with that in mind, they really delivered, and they always deliver as far as their pressings go. And yeah, I just think this one sounds really great. And if you have a chance to pick up a Mobile Fidelity pressing, I recommend it, although they can be kind of expensive. This one, I don't remember, I think maybe it was like $50 or something, so a bit on the pricier side. Not crazy, but they do have some pressings that do get kind of crazy. So next up, we got one of the greatest metal albums of all time. This is Electric Wizard's Dope Throne. Yeah, there's nothing I can really say about this album. Again, there's just like a really phenomenal doom, sludge, metal album. I mean, you just gotta listen to it. Just listen to the title track. Just listen to Funeralopolis. That's probably my favorite Electric Wizard song. I highly recommend this album for just the heaviest, unearthliest tones imaginable. Now for something that is the complete opposite of that. This one's for the jazz heads. This is Gerry Mulligan's Nightlights. And I think this is a really great album. It's a cool jazz album. It's very low-key. It's very mellow. It kind of reminds you of like a sort of coffee shop in the 1930s, or I guess 50s. I think this is kind of when this album came out. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I just think this is a really great sounding record as far as audio quality goes. And for the longest time, you couldn't really get it anywhere. You could buy like a, Philips pressing, original pressing for like, I don't know, hundreds of dollars online. But finally, New Land is the repressor on this one. They have re-released this album for everyone to enjoy. I think it's a really great album, so yeah, just check it out. Up next is an EP that probably few people have heard of. This is Message by Grimm, and I can't really show the cover for obvious reasons. Basically, Grimm is a noise artist from Japan. He has put out like a lot of different noise works, but for this album in particular, or this EP, he decided to go the folk route. And so this is a lot of interesting kind of folky sounds with a little bit of a noise touch. Parable and Coal is my favorite track off of this one. I think it's like the best track personally, but anyways. The thing about this record though, on the flip side, it has like noise remix versions of the song, which is basically just like put every song through like a noise filter, which I don't know, it doesn't sound great the backside, but the front side is phenomenal. Next up, we got another one for the jazz heads. I mean, this one's just a classic. It's a Love Supreme by John Coltrane. This is indeed a Target pressing. It's an orange vinyl pressing too. Personally, I am a bigger Miles Davis fan than a John Coltrane fan, but at the same time, I have to acknowledge his great achievements, and I am a saxophone player, so I am partial to saxophone music. But yeah, I think this is a really good album, and I couldn't recommend it enough. I think, personally, I also like Giant Steps a little bit better than this one, but that's not to say this one's bad by any means. This one's a really great album. Next up, we have an album that I thought I'd never be able to own, and that is Magical by Junko Ōhashi. People will probably recognize this cover as an album that was like $500 on Discogs. Basically, this album had not been repressed for a very long time, and when it was announced, I just threw my money at the computer screen just so I could get it. I can't remember if this is a 45 RPM or a 33 1/3, but it still sounds phenomenal. And yeah, I mean, if you're a city pop fan and you've never heard this album before, I mean, what are you doing? You gotta go listen to this right now. Next up, we got another city pop album. This is Cologne by Kaoru Akimoto. I wouldn't say this is like my favorite city pop album, but I do think this album is very consistent throughout, and not one track I feel like is a miss. This pressing isn't actually an original. This is a HMV reissue. Yeah, I really like this album. I think it's really cool. I might end up selling this one at some point, maybe, but I'm not really sure. I kind of have weird feelings about parting with this. Next up, we got Led Zeppelin 1. This is another reissue. It's really good. This is one of my favorite Led Zeppelin albums. 1 and 2 probably are my favorites. Maybe even 2 is just my favorite. But yeah, I don't know. I really love the sort of classic Zeppelin sound of like sort of blues-based hard rock. Jimmy Page kind of like taught me how to play guitar basically when I was in high school, just listening to Led Zeppelin albums, this album and Led Zeppelin 2. And just kind of like copying what he did a lot. And yeah. Next up is a album by a French funk band, and I'm gonna butcher the name, but it's La Imperatrice. My friend really got me into this band. He loves this band. He even saw him live, I think. I really want to see him live. This is not their newest release, but the one that came before their newest release. This is Takotsubo. I think this is just a really great sounding pop album. It sounds very poppy. It sounds very funky. It grooves to no end. I think that this is just a really great and fresh sounding album, and I've never really heard anything like it. And I think it's just just genius songwriting put together as far as the structure of songs, as far as the arrangement of songs. Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite albums that has come out in recent years, and I can't really recommend it enough. We got another city pop one. This is First Light by Makoto Matsushita. This is male vocalist. Really good guitar work on this one as well. Not as like crazy as Casiopea, obviously, but it's just a very nice sounding album. Sonic quality on this one's great. This is also a repress from HMV. I think the issue with this particular press, and I don't know if other pressings around this time have it, is that the last track has a very awful sort of audio skip on it. It's just something to be aware of when you get this album. It's not a total loss because the last track is a repeat of a track number 4 on this album, but it's an English version. Track number 4 on this album is the Japanese original version. Yeah, aside from that one issue, this is a great pressing and it's a great album. I would say I couldn't recommend it enough, but there are other city pop albums that I like more, but I do really like this one. All right, up next we got a single I never heard of before in my life. No, I'm just kidding. You know, all jokes aside, I think it's a really good, interesting single to have. Obviously, the original song's great, but the remix is or the extended club mix, I'm sorry, is very sort of interesting. I think it's basically just a chopped up, edited version of the original. Very heavy beat, heavy sections of her voice just like sampled and chopped up, like I said. So it's kind of interesting, but nonetheless, I'm glad to have just like the original version on vinyl. It's very nice. Next up, we got a Miles Davis album. This is actually the only Miles Davis album I own, which is kind of sad because I should own more of his work. But anyways, this is Someday My Prince Will Come. Like Night Lights, this is another cool jazz album. album. It's very low-key. It's a typical like 50s smoking in a coffee shop at night type vibe while it's raining, stuff like that. So but yeah, no, I mean, it's still a great jazz album. And I will say cool jazz is probably one of my favorite genres of jazz, which probably explains why I have a couple of these albums. Next up, we have an album that was probably like the first album I ever owned on vinyl. My dad gifted me this one. This is Neil Young's Greatest Hits. And I really like this album, actually. Neil Young, it surprised me because I never really listened to his work before I listened to this. But he's a really great guitar player. I mean, this album is just full of great songs. And if you never really listen to Neil Young, this is a great place to start. Next up, we have 3 albums by one of my favorite bands of all time, the one and only Number Girl. Starting off with Schoolgirl Distortional Addict, this is probably an album that most fans of the band will know best. A lot of people got into this album because of its lead single, Tome Shoujo, and the music video on YouTube. Other than that, yeah, this is really just solid alternative rock album, indie album, going into emo territory as well. But yeah, overall, I think this album's solid. It's not really my favorite Number Girl album, but I do really enjoy the tracks on here. And like I said, I think it's really good as far as 90s alternative rock goes. Next up, we have the band's arguably most popular album. This is Sabbath. Yeah, you can't really go wrong with this album. This is probably, honestly, their best album, even if it's not really my favorite. Although, I will say, it is really great. And some days I do wake up thinking it is my favorite. It hits a lot harder than Schoolgirl Distortional Addict that came before. Very heavy, very dark. Some of the guitar lines are bitter, morose. It's very just kind of all you want in an alternative rock album, in my opinion. And lastly, we have Number Girl's Numb Heavy Metallic. And this one is probably my favorite Number Girl album, honestly. I think I love this one a lot because it's a lot more experimental than the last two. And it's the most experimental thing that they ever did. Although I will say it's not really easy to digest. But that being said, I think you're really rewarded if you really stick with it and just kind of like go through the songs and stuff. I think there's a lot of interesting choices as far as musically and the arrangements and the sort of time signatures they were playing with it. This is obviously kind of a precursor to the frontman's next band, Zazen Boys, which I think is also a great band. But I think it's really rewarding if you can stand to listen to it, I suppose. Next up, we got a compilation from an all-girl Japanese punk rock band from the 80s. This is The Nurse. This is their entire discography, their studio discography anyway. It's very unknown. It's probably slept on. People probably just never heard of it, to be honest. But I think this is a really cool one. The songs are very simple, but effective. Yeah, if you had never heard of this band before, I recommend you check them out. They're kind of interesting. Next up, we got one of my favorite bands of all time, and I know everyone knows this, but this is 4 albums by The Pillows. Starting off with Please Mr. Lost Man, I just think this album is so great. It's kind of a transitional album, came in between the sort of jangle pop era of their early years and their sort of more hard-hitting alternative rock numbers of their sort of mid-period work, but there's not a miss on this album. I think this is also a great album and a 10 out of 10 front to back as far as alternative rock goes. It has just the right amounts of jangle. It has just the right amounts of like hard-hittingness, especially Swanky Street. It's probably one of my favorite Pillows songs ever. But if we're going to talk about pop numbers that really hit hard, I think Little Busters is the perfect album to describe that with, because I think this album is really where the Pillows made their own sound into what it is. This is my favorite Pillows album. There's not a bad song on this album, in my opinion. I think the flow is great as well. Just a really solid album front to back. You can't really go wrong with any of these songs. Some of them are not featured in Fully Cooley, so if you're not really familiar with the Pillows' other work that's not featured in Fully Cooley, this is a great place to start. This is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I really can't recommend it enough. I will say before I move on, a lot of people have asked me how I got a hold of those albums. Well, I actually had them shipped to my apartment in Japan when I was studying abroad there. Obviously, it's kind of hard to do if you're not living in Japan. There are other ways to get around it. There is a video at some point I want to make that is basically just like how to buy Japanese music, you know, online and also just like in person and things like that. So please look forward to that. Up next, we have Fully Cooley soundtrack number 3, which I think this is the album that really got me into the Pillows, to be honest, after I watched Fully Cooley. The thing about this compilation that's really good is it features full-length songs of the Pillows. They're unedited in any way. These are the original studio songs that are featured on their studio albums. The thing about Fully Cooley soundtracks 1 and 2 that most people don't really know is that a lot of those songs that were featured on those soundtracks are basically just lifted right from the anime and put onto the soundtrack. So let's say you had a Pillows song that was like half the song and an instrumental version. Well, that song was basically just how it's going to be featured on soundtracks 1 and 2. But on volume 3, this is the full songs, full-length songs, non-instrumental versions of these songs, just for your listening pleasure. And I think that's why this one's probably the definitive Pillows compilation as far as Fully Cooley goes. Oh yeah, by the way, this is also a translucent blue marble. I keep meaning to show the other colors of my albums, but anyway, here you go. The last Pillows vinyl that I have is the soundtrack for Progressive and Alternative. And like soundtrack number 3, these are the full-length versions of the songs, non-instrumental except for one particular track. It's also great as well. I think the thing about this album that I really like is that soundtrack number 3 I've played over and over again for myself. So it's nice to kind of hear these versions of the songs. It is re-recorded versions of all the Pillows songs, including the 2 that were featured in the Fooly Cooly, the new seasons, or the new seasons at the time. Some people might think it's too sterile, and I could agree with that because the other mixes are a bit more rough, but I think it's really cool to hear these versions from the Pillows, who are now 20 years older at this point. Yeah, I don't know, they just really deliver. They're such a great band, and I'm kind of sad that they've broken up since then, but still, great band nonetheless, and we'll always get to hear their music. And this one's also colored. This is a splatter yellow version, which I think is really cool. And the labels are also really cool too. You know, you have different Fooly Cooly art on them as well. Moving on from the Pillows, this next band is also one of my favorite bands of all time. This is Pink Floyd, and none other than Animals, the 2018 remix deluxe version of that album. And I think this album's really great. You can hear me yap on and on about it in my I listened to the whole Pink Floyd discography video. But yeah, this version of the album is phenomenal. If you haven't heard the original, you should probably check out the original first, but I think this remix opens up the sound in a way that's very three-dimensional, so to speak. This version also comes with the album on CD as well as a DVD and Blu-ray version, so you can hear it in 5.1 surround sound, and it does sound absolutely fantastic. Those versions, I can't really recommend it enough if you get the chance. It also has a booklet if I can get it out. It shows different pictures of the band and the album cover shoot and whatnot. You can see the flying pig. There's the Battersea Power Station, pictures of the band, so yeah, it's very cool. The next Pink Floyd album that I have is The Wall, of course. I don't have Dark Side of the Moon yet, I don't have Wish You Were Here yet, I don't have Metal yet, Sauce for All Secrets yet. I need to work on it, don't worry, it's, you know, we'll get there at some point. But anyways, this version of The Wall is really cool because according to the sticker, it is a Japanese pressing mastered at half speed. I hope it's mastered at half speed like the sticker would lead me to believe, but the sticker is actually just like someone had wrote that, so I don't really know if it's true or not. I can't really find any other info on this, so if you do know, please leave a comment. But yeah, this album sounds phenomenal. I mean, The Wall is The Wall. It's a great album. It does come with a Japanese insert with the lyrics in Japanese and the credits in Japanese as well, so it's just kind of cool. Next up, we have a band that I probably never really talk about that much on my channel, but this is The Police. This is their last album, Synchronicity. Some of their albums are kind of wonky and some of the track lists are kind of weird, and I'm not necessarily a fan of the entire album of, like, say, Outlandos de Amor and Regatta and Blanc or whatever, but I do think that this album is great front to back. This is also a first press. I bought this when I was up in Washington, and the guy that sold it to me was very knowledgeable about records, and he said, I can't find the top here, and he said that you can tell it's a first press because it is actually translucent purple. It's very dark, but when you hold it up to the light, it is actually purple. So I don't really know if you'll be able to tell, but it is actually purple if you hold it up to the light. Next up, this album is just a classic in my opinion. This is Portishead's Dummy. If you haven't really heard it, it's kind of like a sort of James Bond soundtrack. This album came out in 1994, and it's sort of like, I don't really know how to explain it really, but you just have to listen to it. It's so great. It's the genre is trip hop. They are the pioneers of trip hop. Yeah, I don't know. It's just really good. It's very moody, dark, atmospheric. The beats on this are really solid. If you only had to listen to one song, I would say Glory Box is a great one, and followed by Rhodes is also just phenomenal. Next up, we got a classic. This is Queen, A Night at the Opera, and this is a Japanese pressing, as you can see with the Obi strip. Probably Queen's best album, I might even say, in my opinion. Yeah, there's just so many good songs on here, you know, aside from, of course, the obvious Bohemian Rhapsody. Okay, next up, we got my favorite band of all time. Everyone knows it's Radiohead. So we got 4 different albums here, although I should have them all, really. First up is The Bends. This album was bought on Amazon, I think, but this one is just phenomenal as far as the pressing goes. I really love this album. This is an album that really never fails to put a smile on my face when I listen to it. A lot of this album has influenced my guitar playing and my artistry personally. Johnny Greenwood is one of my biggest guitar inspirations. I just really love this album, and this is probably the greatest 90s alternative rock album. I'm just gonna say it here and now. This is not really a bad song on this album. I can't really recommend it enough if you never heard it. Just go listen to it if you never heard it. I mean, like, it's such a great album. Now, of all the great things I said about the Bends, of course, here's OK Computer, which is my favorite album of all time. This is another one. It's a bit harder to digest than the Bends. The reason why I recommend the Bends really to a lot of people is because it's just kind of immediately like, there, you get it. OK Computer is not really like that. It took me a couple listens to really kind of start to appreciate it, and it took me a lot more listens to really appreciate for what it is. Yeah, I mean, I've just heard this album like hundreds of times, and I just love it so much. It's really great. It's obviously one of the greatest albums of all time, some people will tell you. Whereas Bends is the greatest 90s alternative rock album of all time, this is just, to me, one of the greatest albums of all time, period. I mean, I highly recommend it, but I do know that it is an album that's not quite the easiest Radiohead album to get into, but like I said, it is one of my favorites and literally just my favorite album all time. That said though, I always think my favorite Radiohead album is a tie between the Bends, OK Computer, Kid A, and In Rainbows, so I mean, there is that, but I guess OK Computer is the most consistent favorite, I will say. Next up, and this might surprise people, but we got Hail to the Thief. The reason why I have this album over something like Kid A is because I heard this pressing is really good, and I figured I just had to have it, so this is another one of those you can just buy on Amazon or, you know, whatever retailer, and yeah, this one sounds really great. Actually, this pressing is really good, and I think it's a 45 RPM record, so it sounds really even better. I think this was just a really solid Radiohead album. It's actually just kind of underrated, I guess, because, you know, not many people think it's great. It is, the track list is a bit bloated, I will say. There are some songs here that don't really hit as hard for me as others, but I do think this is a really good album, and it is very interesting and very relevant, unfortunately. The last Radiohead album I have here is In Rainbows. This is a solid album. The one I really want to get at some point is A Moon-Shaped Pool. I mean, I do want to get them all, but A Moon-Shaped Pool, obviously, and Kid A is up there for me. But yeah, I have In Rainbows here. This is also, I believe, an Amazon pressing, or Amazon acquired. And I will say that this one is not really that great. I think that it has some pops and clicks on it that probably will not come off, even if I clean it. So yeah, just be aware of that. At some point, I do want to get maybe the special. There's like a special 45 RPM version that's like $100, $200 or whatever. I'm not really like in a rush for that, but I will get it maybe at some point if I ever have the money in the future. For now, I'll just have this one though. This one's good. Yeah, I mean, this is just a great album in general, I will say. You know, this is one of the other Radiohead albums that's really easy to get into as well. So if you like, you know, you want to get into Radiohead, The Bends, and In Rainbows is also really good as well. Next up, we got Rage Against the Machine's self-titled album. I believe this is the 20th anniversary version, the Rage Against the Machine XX version. You might see there's like a sticker. I don't have the sticker anymore. I think that I will say I might enjoy Evil Empire a bit more nowadays than this one, but I think this one is a really great introduction to the band, and you really can't go wrong with this album, and I think it's still great. Next up, we have a bit of an outlier in my collection. My dad got me this one. This one is Rubén Blades' Sol Swing, and I'm saying that completely wrong. Basically, this album is a double album, and on one disc it's salsa, and the other disc it's swing. I really love the swing part, obviously, having come from a jazz background personally, but obviously the salsa is great as well. Next up is probably the most YouTube core album that I own. This is Ryō Fukui's Scenery. People will know this is a great jazz piano album, and it certainly delivers. This one, I believe, was mastered at half speed. I think this one is just a really great jazz album. It's a really great piano album. I mean, just go listen to it. It's on YouTube. Everyone's heard it. Next up is actually a band that I know personally. This is Every Day I'm Less Zen by Shutups. Shutups is actually a band that came into the radio station that I used to work at, and they played on a couple different occasions, and I got to know them because of that. And basically, yeah, I mean, it was a really fun experience. I really love their music. They're probably one of my favorite bands to come in and play. So yeah, when they announced that they were going to release this album in 2019, I bought it immediately. It's a great album. I think it's really cool. They have a lot of great songs on here. This is their debut. Before they released this, they had a couple different EPs that I also really enjoyed, but this is their first full-length album, which is good. I've heard that they have another one on the way at some point, so that's very exciting. But yeah, I would recommend this album. It's a really great alternative rock album. And also the poppy nature of some of the songs might surprise you. It's actually a very pleasant listen and a very good listen. Next up is probably one of my favorite albums of all time. This is Sonic Youth's Daydream Nation. I would probably credit this album for getting me into alternative rock as a whole. I first listened to it, I was kind of like, wow, this is a lot of different things you can do with the guitar. Kind of really couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop listening to it. Even the noise sections in this one, like, and the end of the sprawl, I think that's really great. If you haven't heard it, I highly recommend you check it out, especially if you're a guitar player. It's kind of a must listen if you're a guitar player, in my opinion. Next up, this might be the most rare album in my collection. It's also a city pop album. This is Taeko Ōhnuki's Mignon, and I might be pronouncing that wrong. This is actually an original copy of this album. I got it for like $40 when I was in Japan, and probably the reason why it was so dirt cheap is because it was kind of warped. Not warped to the point where it wouldn't play, but it was obviously warped, kind of like a bowl, and it was kind of annoying to look at every time I put it on the turntable. Slowly the warp is coming out, but I'm sure it still is, to be honest. I will say it's probably not my favorite city pop album once again, but the track 4 AM, as most people will know of this album, is a phenomenal song. Yeah, maybe at some point I would consider selling this. I'm not really sure yet, but don't really count on it anytime soon. I just kind of I like hesitate to sell it just because I really kind of like it. So this next album is a sort of combination of things that I enjoy, which is electronic music and Holst the Planet's Suite. This is the Tomita Planets. This is the Holst the Planet Suite done by Tomita, who is an electronic Japanese musician. And he basically just rearranged the whole suite with electronic instruments. It's a very interesting version of the suite. It's a very sort of space-agey version. The songs sound really just kind of interesting and kind of almost come to life in a different way that you wouldn't maybe necessarily expect. The Planet Suite's probably one of my favorite pieces of classical music, just in general. Everyone enjoys Jupiter, but I think Saturn is really the greatest song on this album. But yeah, this is a really interesting add-on to that, I think. Next up is another Tomita album. This is Snowflakes Are Dancing. And this is basically the same thing as that one, but this is with a bunch of Debussy songs. You know, they're really nice. Obviously, Clair de Lune is a classic on here, but there's quite a few interesting ones as well. Okay, so it's like 11 o'clock at night, and I'm finishing editing the video, and I realized I actually missed one. This is After Five Clash by Toshiki Kadomatsu. And yeah, it's a great city pop album. I really like this one. Probably my second favorite city pop album, you know, under Magical. But I think the bass guitar on this album is really great, and obviously, who could deny that's a really cool album cover, but anyways. This next album is the soundtrack to one of my favorite films of all time. This is the Blade Runner soundtrack. Before I kind of just talk about that a little bit, I will say that the songs on this album, some of them are not actually featured in the film. I believe tracks 2 through 4, Blush Response, Wait For Me, and Rachel's Song. Those 3 songs are not actually featured in the film itself, but the rest are. Blade Runner is just one of my favorite films of all time. I am a sort of science fiction fan, and so anything science fiction really catches my eye. Blade Runner obviously is one of the greatest science fiction films of all time. Yeah, I just love it so much. I think it sort of poses a lot of interesting questions as far as humanity goes, and yeah, it's just a great watch. And of course, the soundtrack is great. I mean, that's the whole purpose of me talking about the film in the first place. Very sort of Pink Floyd sounding, so if you've never seen the film, I mean, I really recommend you check out the film, but if you just want to hear the music is great as well. Next up are 3 albums by one of my favorite solo artists that I hardly ever get to mention, but I do try to mention it every time it comes up, and that is Yoshiko Sai. She is a poet from Nara Prefecture in Japan, and she realized that one day she could turn her poems into songs, and doing so, that would probably reach a wider audience. The lyrics are all written by her. They're all arranged by some other guy who I don't remember the name of. Let's get into it. So starting with Mangekyo, this is, I think, her first album. And this is a very sort of Japanese-sounding album as far as the arrangements and the music on this one goes. This is a really good album. It's also very expensive. This is an original copy, actually. I do not even want to think about how much I paid for this one. This one's really good as far as, yeah, if you like sort of Japanese music, Japanese instrumentation. Next up, and this is probably my favorite album of hers, this is Miko. As opposed to that one, which is more Japanese-sounding, this is more, I guess, world music sounding. There's a lot more instruments incorporated from different cultures, such as like the sitar. This one I think is probably just my favorite. I think this one's really cool, very sort of atmospheric, ambient. These songs hit hard, but in a sort of emotional kind of way, not necessarily like a heavy sort of way. I think the album cover is also really nice. This actually, the texture on this feels like a canvas, has that sort of quality to it. The last Yoshiko Sai album I have is Cho no Sumu Heya, or The Room Which the Butterfly Dwells. Yeah, this one is a bit more jazzy sounding, sort of soft or cool jazz in a way. Not necessarily cool jazz in the way that those other albums were in my collection, but anyways. And again, just the sort of, the way it hits you is a lot more emotionally as opposed to just like heavy hitting songs. The last LP I have in my collection before moving on to some of these singles up here is Zazen Boys' latest album, Rondo. This album's really good. I think it proves that they can still churn out great songs even at this late in their career. But that said, I certainly wouldn't mind if they pressed their first, second, third, and fourth albums on vinyl. The last thing in my collection are these 5 singles, which we'll go over one by one. Starting off with number 1, this is Fly Day Chinatown by Yasuha, and this is just a really phenomenal city pop single if you never heard it. I really love this song. It also has a really cool B-side, which I believe is called Morning Date or Morning something. I can't quite remember. Next up is a 4-track EP by a band called Casket. Relatively unknown, and they've pretty much just erased their presence from the internet, but they still have this EP. You can find it digitally on Bandcamp, I believe. You can also find copies of this whenever you still can. It actually might be kind of rare now. I've had people actually message me on Discogs, like looking for this, asking if I would part with this, but I can't because I think it's a really cool EP. Next up, we got the White Stripes with Handsprings, and then on the back is Red Death at 614. But Handsprings is really the reason why I bought this, and I've been a huge fan of the White Stripes ever since I was in high school. Every, so often I'll go back and revisit them, and I really love their earlier stuff. I just think, kind of like the Black Keys, I think it's just so raw and visceral, and it just like hits you immediately. At some point I should do like a whole White Stripes discography video because I'd love to do that, but yeah. Next up is Golden Earrings, Radar Love. This is just a really good song, a really cool song. You got the original UK single version and the Moontan LP version on the other side. I think it might be actually 33 1/3 on one side, and the single is a 45. Really cool song. This is a Record Store Day version. This is a yellow vinyl, I believe. Very cool color. It also has a little bit of stuff blended in with the yellow, but anyways, yeah. And the last album, and certainly the most least, is a ride on the Super Skunk through the Redwoods. It's a novelty record. This is basically just kind of an audio version of what it's like to ride on this train throughout Northern California. I am not gonna lie, I have no idea how I acquired this, but it's just in my collection now, so that's kind of interesting. I remember listening to it once and just kind of thinking this kind of, you know, you just get to hear this ambient sounds of the train, ambient sounds of the environment, so it is what it is, I suppose. Thank you very much for watching. I've probably been sitting here for over an hour. Like I said, at some point I'll probably do the CD collection, probably talk a little bit more about what I'd like to sell, because there's quite a few CDs I'd like to sell and things like that. I guess as far as the channel goes, there will be merch coming soon, maybe in a month or two, I'm not really sure. I would like to have a store where I could sell my merch and also basically sell some of these music if people want it, other things, maybe like my gear, certain pedals that I don't want anymore and things like that. Just basically put things on the store for people to buy to support the channel and support me directly. But yeah, I don't know, we'll see. There are exciting things to come, so please stay tuned, and thank you very much for watching. We'll do the CD collection at some point, maybe in a couple weeks or something.